Hello and welcome to Note Doctors Summer Shorts. My name is Paul.
My name is Jenn.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In these short episodes, we will be sharing with each other and all of you musical examples and teaching tips covering a wide range of topics. So if you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome back to Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. So you are joining us midway through our summer book club on Ken Bain's What the Best College Teachers Do. And of course, this episode is sponsored by the Texas Women's University School of the Arts and Design. So we are kicking off our discussion of chapters 5 and 6. If you are joining us now, make sure you go listen to the past two episodes where we talk about the first 4 chapters. But we are digging into these 2 chapters where, as the titles say, are on how these best teachers conduct class and then how they treat their students. And I am continuously convicted and inspired, kind of simultaneously, as I read this. Because I'm like, I want to do more, and I also, I should be better, right?
I felt better about my teaching after reading chapter 5 and 6. I don't know about you two.
Yeah, I was able to connect with some things like, oh, okay, there you go. I think these teachers are presented in such incredible ways that's easy to get a little bit of imposter syndrome, perhaps, if you're insecure with your teaching. But that's okay. It's okay to be pushed and challenged. I mean, that's why these books exist. That's why we read these books, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought we'd kind of start just with chapter 5 on how these teachers conduct their class. I was kind of particularly struck just with these kind of principles that he lays out in this chapter. The first one, creating a natural, critical learning environment. And he kind of talks about having an intriguing question or problem is the first of these essential elements in creating a natural, critical learning environment. What do you think about that in a theory classroom? Like, how do we create that kind of critical learning environment?
So over and over and over again in that section, he talks about questions. Like the questions that you ask when you start, the questions that you get the students to engage with one another on, the questions that the students are left with at the end, right? So I think it may be about getting them to engage with the content from that perspective. Like asking the question rather than giving the answer was kind of the motto of this section, right. I thought.
Yeah.
Yes. Definitely. And all the 7 things do not get equal time in the chapter.
True.
The second one is just get their attention and keep it. And I think it's just a paragraph. Like, make sure you have your students' attention and keep it. Like, don't just teach to the wall. But then, number 1 about the critical learning environment gets a lot of time and explanation, part of which I think is due to explanations of what does he mean by critical learning environment. That engages with a lot of different things. Are we actually asking our students those higher order questions? Compare, apply, evaluate, analyze. I've a lot of times written a homework where I'll say analyze, but then I think, is that really analysis? If they're just chord labeling, is that really analysis? And I think the answer is no. A lot of times you think, I'm having them analyze something, but it's really not the deep level analytical thinking that he is talking about. And that's something I've thought a lot about. Like, can we get our students to say something about what the music is doing? Or what is it about that first inversion? Why would it not be root position? Making a statement about why that sounds the way it does. Or why is it that you would construct a meter in a certain way? Why would you construct this rhythm in a certain way based on text? Or things that really are more analytical instead of just what we call, for example, Roman numeral analysis, what a lot of people think music theory is, right? That paradigm that people come into class thinking, this is what I'm going to do music theory. I'm going to label chords, woohoo. And some people get really jazzed about that, and some people get really turned off bored by that. Right. So just kind of dismantling that paradigm and also overcoming and engaging that higher order thinking with like actual analysis instead of what we come to think of as analysis and just a homework for theory 1 or something. That's something I wrote into my notes for the chapter 5.
I mean, the flip side of that coin is, like, I don't think that maybe analysis is the right word, but at the same time, they do have to do, like, in order to label correctly, there are a lot of things they have to know and understand about the music and tease out from the music in order to do it right. And anyone who's ever graded a Roman numeral analysis knows that. They will do weird things, like they will count every single note and call it something totally bizarre. They will not count enough of the notes. There's all sorts of kind of things they have to intuit from the music in order to say, like, that is the chord that is sounding at this time, unless it's something super straightforward that is, but even things that are in chorale style or hymn texture or whatever can have elements of having to tease out what's really happening. And, if you've ever seen a student label, for example, the moment of a suspension, like the labels that students come up with for that moment are absolutely absurd. And so my point is, like, labeling, yes, it's true. Like, they're not doing that kind of critical thinking step. And at the same time, I don't want to, like, discount the amount of things they do have to do in order to get a correct label in that moment. Maybe the key in there is helping them understand all of those things that they do have to do to get that right label.
Right. I think that's the key, right? Because when we think, oh, you're going to label that chord, it's as simple as looking at the color red and labeling it red, right? Like, it's super quick for us, right? There's nothing that we have to like investigate or diagnose. Like, oh, this color red or blue or green? Like, no, it's just red, right? We can tell it instantaneously. But a chord is not a color, right? Chord could be multiple things, right? And there's all these steps that we have to. Maybe, I guess, if you're synesthetic, right? Maybe a chord is a color. But there's all these steps, right? And so so it is good, I think, to have them label things. But do they call them analysis? I don't know. Do you like detective work? I don't know. But they're having to tease those out. The thing I thought about with this like natural critical learning environment is. Something I do in Theory 4 quite a bit is trying to get students to understand, why these composers are doing what they're doing. You get to, post-tonal music, or even like Schoenberg, Webern, and like, well, why on earth would these composers do that? Like, we spent all this time, with Roman numeral analysis and functional harmony, and now we're just kind of throwing it out. And we have to learn a new system, and this music is very foreign. But just taking some time to kind of maybe explain, why these composers did this. Like, why does their music sound like that? Like, you have to get into like romanticism, like if you're to understand modernism, and so you kind of bring them. Okay, I'll read them some like E.T.A. Hoffman writing about Beethoven, who's just like going nuts on Beethoven, like he's like this person ushering this incredible sublime experience. Like, it's so over the top, right? Yeah. But like that, the birth of the genius and this idea of progress and moving forward. If you can understand that makes perfect sense why Schoenberg and these folks would continue to push the boundaries, even when, they admit in their own writing that, they kind of sad that people don't hum their tunes, right? Right. But they feel like they are propelled to push the boundaries and go further and further because of these kind of romantic ideals of genius and progress, and that shapes modernism, right?
The context is critical to being able to ask these questions, but our discipline has been so divorced from context for such a
Right.
long time. I mean, it's kind of when you're teaching jazz theory, like day one, I will put some insane bebop stuff in front of them. And if they are not jazz listeners, that sounds chaotic and exhausting and confusing. They do not know what on earth to do with it. They can't sing it, right? It's kind of a similar situation. They're like, I can't sing this tune.
Yeah, like take me
but
back
you
to
can't-
like, you know, Duke Ellington. Come on, like some
Right.
Glenn
Well,
Miller.
Right.
That's
and
jazz.
So, but then because then we do begin at the beginning, right? We start with early jazz, we make our way through swing, and when we get to bebop, there's a lot about the culture and the context that they understand, that suddenly those things make sense. Like suddenly now we have like highly trained virtuosic performers who want to show how good they are at what they do. Suddenly we have people who don't care as much about popular appeal and who think that like the craft, the art is more important, right? And then you get the counter response to that too, which is cool jazz and hard bop and all of those things, where the musicians are like, cool, but like, could also people sing it? Like, could maybe it also not be so much like doing all the things? So yeah, I mean, but without that context, the music itself, you could make some really not so great. You could draw some bad conclusions or some incorrect conclusions about the music without all of that context.
Right. And usually those conclusions are like value based, I found. Like, you know,
100%. I liked it.
I liked it. Or
I hated it.
I hate it. This, yeah.
Yeah.
This is not really music. This is just random, right? Which we're trying to train whole musicians, right? Whole people. That's one of the things he talks about too, is like training the person, teaching the person, not just not the content, like the person as well.
I think so. What you just said reminded me of a moment that I actually had in jazz theory this spring that I think was a good sort of like naturally critical classroom environment moment, because I played the song Smells Like Teen Spirit, the arrangement by The Bad Plus. If you're not a jazzer, go look it up. It's kind of fun, especially if you're Gen X. And you know that song from being a teenager, an angsty teenager, right? Okay, so I play this Nirvana song, right? The Bad Plus version is very tongue-in-cheek, very, if you know that band, that's their MO, right? Like that's kind of how they operate, but they're great, really intense musicians. I've played that piece in jazz theory every time I've taught the class for however many years and never had a reaction from my students at all. This spring, when I played that piece, or they would react kind of being like, oh, that's crazy. That smells like teen. They're doing Nirvana, right? Like that would be the only reaction. This spring, there was a small group of students who were like, I hated that. Like they had this very like vocal, aggressive reaction to The Bad Plus.
Right.
But I asked questions like, why? And then that got the class started. Well, I didn't like how it sounded. It made me feel uncomfortable or whatever. Then I would say things like, is comfort the only reason we listen to music? It led to a really good conversation about why people make music, why certain music exists. Like, does music have to be, many of them are commercial music students. Does music have to be commercially successful to be good? Like, all of those kinds of things. It led to this really great conversation that I hadn't planned. But in the moment, it was because I didn't want to let just a personal reaction to a piece of music be the end of the story or the end of the discussion. And I think maybe that's what he's getting at here, is this idea that like, well, you have content that you have to cover, but in a naturally critical environment, you're always opening the door to talk about things that are bigger than, you know, whatever it was we were doing that day. I don't even remember what the actual topic was. What I do remember is we talked about Bad Plus for 25 minutes of that 50-minute class period because of that reaction and because of counter reactions then in the class of people who were like, I thought it was really creative, you know? So very interesting. But I bet a lot of my students remember that day too.
Oh, for sure. And, you know, you kind of like overlapped a lot of what happens in the end of chapter 5 and also the beginning of chapter 6, I think, because he's talking about reacting to your students and being able to not only get your students to talk, that's kind of the end of this craft of teaching, but then like having that rapport with your students that you sense when they don't understand something. Like when you say, does this make sense? And you read the reaction and you realize that the answer is no, or you realize that the answer is there. This is very unsettling to them. Let's probe a little bit deeper and peel off a couple more layers of that onion so that we can have a change to their understanding of this piece or this style or whatever it is that you're uncovering. And if you're not in tune to that, you just blow through it. Like, I mean, you could replay that class and think, well, what would have happened if you just blow through that moment? I mean,
if I'd just been like, well, that's your opinion, and moved on. Right.
You know? I mean, that would have been tragic.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, I think we had a really good discussion about a lot of things, and things that relate exactly to what they want to do with their lives, which was the other element of this, is that, like, he talks about specifically how professors change up their content to be relevant to the human beings that are sitting in front of them. That it's not, you don't necessarily tell the same story that you've told 25 times prior if it doesn't make sense anymore to the people in the room. So.
Yep. And the way you tell it can be different each time as well.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting about the warm. I had not
warm
heard that
language,
before,
yeah.
Warm language.
Warm language, yeah.
The way you're actually telling that story or the way you're delivering the lecture. I've thought about that a lot. I mean, several of you that are listening know that I have a lot of people that I'm teaching at one time, and I have a microphone. And sometimes I just think, oh, it's just me being funny, like, you know, doing stupid stuff with the microphone, or like flipping my pencil and catching it behind my back. But like, there is something to that keeps people looking at me and sucked in, and I think it has to do with like just the way of delivery that for me it just comes a little bit more easily in that type of thing than, you know, the overall conceptual thing of, okay, am I asking these larger questions that are fundamentally going to change people's lives? That hit me and I thought, wow, I don't know if I am. But then some of these things with like, how am I sucking my students in, with like keeping them engaged, you know, I think at that part, I think I have to do it. And just because I've had to do it so often over the last 7 or 8 years, I've kind of improved on that part of just sucking people in and doing little activities that will get people's attention quickly. And that really resonated with me because I can tell now when I look out into the room, is this lesson bombing, you know, or are they really just signing off on me here or not? And then what do I need to do to bring them back in? And instead of just continuing till the 50 or the end of class, I can change on the fly and, you know, make a little bit more nuance or deliver it in a little bit different way so that it hits. And in my first 2 or 3 years, that wouldn't have happened. I would have just plugged through it and followed my notes as they were prepared.
Absolutely.
From before.
I mean, without a doubt, none of the people that he references in this book are like first, second, or third year teachers. These are all like seasoned people who've been doing this a long time. It does take time to learn how to think on your feet like that. It does take time to learn how, like, maybe you've noticed from the very first day how engaged they are or whether they're engaged, but you haven't always known what to do about it, or I haven't always known what to do about it. I think the warm language hit me the most with thinking about like the first days of Theory 1, which I'm about to be embarking on very soon here, and thinking about, because he talks about how you can describe, I think the example he uses is the Goldilocks story, but he says that you can describe it from this very like, there's this little girl and she's wandering around through the woods and she's hungry and she's tired and she happens upon this cottage and maybe she shouldn't have gone in, but the door is unlocked, right? So you can do this very kind of engaging kind of theatrical approach, or you can assume that the students all know already about the Goldilocks story and you can be very matter of fact. Like, yeah, there's this girl, she sneaks in, she steals everything, nothing's ever right for her, she eventually just, you know, just right, you know, like that's the moral, moving on. But I think it can be very hard with those first, you know, that first unit of Theory 1. You're thinking, they know what a treble clef is. They know how to name the notes, right? And if they don't, they probably already feel awkward about it. And now I'm making it worse. And I'm saying things like, you have to go home and practice this until you can do it off the top of your head, right? They know, they've heard of a key signature. But the reality is that might be true, but also I've seen some pretty badly done key signatures. I've seen some Theory 2 students writing key signatures. I'm like, what happened here? Like, why is that flat floating way up above there? It doesn't even go there. I don't. So, you know, looking at it, I'm like, how can I continue to? I think there are times where I assume that they're bored, or I assume that they already know something or whatever. And I could instead tell a much more engaging story. And even if it's one that they have heard before, maybe they'll get something new out of it, you know?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons why I started making handouts, is because I thought if I just have them look at the textbook, a lot of the times when you open the textbook to a chapter on whatever it is, you have an example that's all filled in with all the explanation there and everything. It might just be, let's take cadences, for example. That's a Theory 1 topic that we'll all probably encounter at some point this fall. You open up a chapter on cadences, it has a couple examples, and it'll mark in half cadence here, PAC here, whatnot, right? Descriptions. But yet you're still going to get that person who has a 4-bar phrase and they've marked in 4 cadences.
Yeah, every time there's a 5, they're like, it's a half cadence.
They're not listening for where the cadence is, right? There's something that's really revelatory about that answer. They don't actually understand what a cadence is. They're labeling things. They're not understanding what a cadence is. And I think part of that, to me, is if you are just given something with the answer on it, like you were just referring to, Jen, it kind of takes this cold language approach where you're just laying it out and saying, okay, of course, there's the end of the phrase. Of course, you heard that, and that's a half cadence, right? Mm-hmm. And you hear it end on the dominant, or, you know, didn't it sound unsettled? Or you could go as far as you want with these kind of hermeneutics. But I think what for me made me want to develop my own handouts is to leave stuff out so that you can just play it and say, okay, everybody just raise your hand when you think the end of the first phrase was, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. I found that to be a lot more productive. And then you have that student saying, aha, you raised your hand one time here and then one time here. Now, why did you raise your hand there? And you get the students to talk based on that, instead of giving them a thing that says, okay, 4 bars half cadence, 4 bars PAC, moving on, right? You know?
Right. Mm-hmm. No, I do the same thing with cadences. If you're not doing that as like a discovery method approach, it's a missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. Like if you're just explaining what a cadence is and then finding them in music, it's a missed opportunity.
Or not listening at all.
Exactly.
To the music.
Like start from listening, start from the sound every single time, because they will nail it every single time. Mm-hmm. And then you can lead them to say, okay, well, what happened there? Let's look at all the things that happened there. What happened in the melody that made you think that? What happened if there's a text? What happened in the text that made you think that? If there's, you know, and then eventually they get around to, oh, wait, well, the harmony is always either like some combination of 5 and 1, it seems, you know, they get there. Or that one felt like we stopped, but also not. That's a half cadence, right? So, yeah. But it's thinking, it's having the time. We talked about this before this call. Having the time ahead of time, because that's the other thing he says, is that he talks about how many of these people said they sit in silence for several minutes before they teach a class, thinking about like how they're going to do it and what they're going to say and what questions they're going to ask. And I'm like, I would love 15 minutes of silence.
Yeah, it's hard to be like, you know, because sometimes it's like you're just running from one class to the next, and you're like, all right, what are we teaching today? I mean, sometimes there are days like that, but there are also days that I think, as you mentioned, Jen, like the beginning of the semester time is something I think we can all kind of prep and work on to kind of bring those students in. There's like, I'll sometimes do this exercise the first day of Theory 3. I'll bring in the Prelude number 1 from the Well-Tempered Clavier, but I put my name as the composer, and I'm like, this is a piece of mine. I'm gonna play this for you, and we're gonna listen to it. And then of course I play it. Some of the students know what it is. Other students are clueless, right? And then I talk through the process that I had with composing it. I'm like, I play the little first measure. That was my idea, right? And then I'm like, well, what has to happen next? And then kind of like, oh, we have a cadence. And then we look and like, oh yeah, we play the cadence, right? And then we talk about where could we go, right? And then we kind of construct the piece as if I were composing it, right? Oh, you go to the dominant, like you go away from home, right? You've established home, and then what should you do? Oh, you should go back home, and then you take the scenic way back, right? Because you have that super long prolongation of the dominant, right? And of course, by the end, we're like, this is just Bach, right? I just Bach, right? I did not compose
No big
that,
deal.
right? But it's like inviting them in to engage with the material. In where they have to come up with answers, not everything is given, and it's kind of this creative process. It's just like the handout that has those missing things. You have to figure things out rather than just label this, or I'm going to show you what it is, and now you go repeat it. But like inviting them into this like where the music is alive, right? The music, there's a reason for it to be, and it's a live thing.
That's the quote I was hunting for. It's actually from How Do They Treat Their Students? But it says that the best college teachers are not guarding the kingdom of knowledge. They are not gatekeepers of the information. They are throwing the doors wide open and inviting the students in. Like, you're now one of us. You're now someone who thinks critically and about music and analyzes music. Welcome. Come join us in this great thing that we're going to do together this semester. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that too. I don't know if I ever really felt like that as an undergrad, particularly in any of my classes.
Even though we had some wonderful,
we had some great
professors.
teachers, but I'm like, there was still this like gatekeeper, even if it was just something that I put on myself, perhaps as a student.
Well, we actively reject that language here. I say, like in freshman orientation, I say, like, music theory is a class where we all discover things. This is, if someone in your life has told you that this class is a weed out class, I don't weed, I garden. Like, that's not what we're doing here. But still, they bring that concept. That their high school music teachers have told them it's a weed out class. Their piano teacher has said, that class is where they make sure you can actually cut it, right? And I just please don't ever say that. Stop it.
Yes,
it makes them do badly.
Yes. That's what say that again, Jen. That's a good quote right there.
I don't weed, I garden.
I don't weed, I garden. Boom.
I mean, you have to weed to garden, so it kind of doesn't work. But
I know.
My point is, like, I'm cultivating, like, we're cultivating things that will nourish us here. Yeah. We're not weeding things out. That's not what this is about.
Yeah, it's actually a parenting book, but I like the analogy. It's the carpenter and the gardener, and it's about parenting, but like, how you could parent like a carpenter, like you're trying to build your child in a certain way, or you can grow your child like a gardener, right? And obviously the gardener is the an analogy that's promoted because you can't control your child, like you can you can't force them into the shape.
One of those terrible horntail worms that eats your whole tomato plant.
That's right.
That could happen.
That could happen.
And then what you do is you take that thing and you throw it in the creek behind your house. True story.
And then you try to save that poor little tomato
plant.
Save that
little plant. My little plant. I'm going to give you some nitrogen.
There you go. Right, but that's the thing. Like you can't force the plant to grow. You can put it in the right situation where, with the soil and the water and the light, that it can thrive the best. But it's up to that plant to grow. But it's your responsibility as the gardener to give it the best circumstances as possible, and however they grow, right? Yeah,
that's a good analogy for class too.
A lot of the chapter 6 concepts.
Yes.
They're kind of, to me, in my chapter 6 notes, I don't know what you guys wrote down, but it seemed like a lot of don'ts and then a lot of do's. Like, you have to trust, you have to have this openness, you have to really take your students on an intellectual journey, you have to have humility. You have to show that you're invested in your students. I think students can see through. Like, students have X-ray vision in a certain way. Like, if you get up there and you do not really believe in your particular talk of that day, I'm convinced that every single person in that room can see right through you. You know, and I've done it. I'll be honest. There's some lectures where I'm like, I don't love this lecture. I feel like this is not something that's fundamental to their understanding or their career option. You know, I need to understand how to do from the 265 to the 5, you know, or I want to do a 4-7 to a 5, and I want to show how it's more likely to do parallel, whatever, so I'm going to take it to a credential 6-4. Okay, it seems like such a small niche thing, but I'm going to go do it. It seems like it's important to somebody, so I'm going to go do it. And I don't 100% believe in it myself, and they can tell. They can tell, and it's weird how I don't know how to describe that feeling, but there's this kind of transparency when authenticity is missing. The students can exactly tell. And I try to pivot away, or I've eliminated that. You know, now I don't even teach that little nuanced thing. I try to teach more broadly or conceptually what's going on. And that's what evolves our lectures and things, luckily. But I really have felt that before about this kind of investment in your students and the authenticity element of, I really do believe this. This will serve you here, and this is why. And you showing that, they will then reciprocate. I've seen that 100%, and I've felt that.
Yeah, I've sometimes felt that with in oral skills. There's some topics that the homework gets into that I'm like, do I really need to cover that? Do they really need to know that common tone diminished chord? Like, I don't like.
Although those are actually in a lot of styles.
They are in a lot of styles. The popular jazz. I mean, like, was it When You Wish Upon a Star? I think has a common tone diminished chord. I mean, it happens, but like, I think there's sometimes
they need to part write it. Probably not.
Right. Yeah, and you're like, do I need to spend this much time on something that, you know, only you're going to encounter in very, very few circumstances? And even if you encounter them, you're probably not going to have to identify it. You just got to play it. Just play the notes. Like, you're like, oh, that's a weird thing, and you move on.
Right.
Yeah. So the authenticity, and then the trust. Like, he talks about trust so much. So I was wondering, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust your students?
This
9.
is tricky.
Because it's like, what do you trust them to do, right?
Right. It depends on the circumstance. Like, I think there are things where what I have tried to do, and I think I got this from Jenny Snodgrass, what I have tried to do is things where I know that they are not going to be able to resist collaborating and asking each other. I try to make that just an option for them. Or I try to explain to them how to do it and still effectively do what they need to do. So for homework, they can't collaborate on homework, but I will explain to them, let's say you have waited, it is 2 a.m. This assignment is due at 8 a.m. You cannot message me because I will not answer you. I am in bed. Your roommate, however, is not, and they took Theory 1 last semester, right? Here's what you do, is you do not ask them for the answer to that question. You ask them, you know, or you could say, like, this is what I put. Is it right or wrong? That's different than saying, like, tell me the answer to this question. But in the end, I've also kind of reached a point where I'm like, I've made the homework balance out in such a way that if they are cheating on every single homework assignment, they still are not going to pass the class if they don't understand the material. And so I don't need to feel like I have to police that. And it's also really, they're bad at it. So it's very obvious when they do that kind of thing. And I'm able often to have a discussion. Like I will write something on there. Because I allow homework corrections, I might write something like, I need you to come talk to me about this, you know. And a lot of times then you'll discover something that you didn't know, you know. Like, actually, I have no idea what you're saying any given day of any given week, and I have not this whole time, and I need help, you know, or whatever. But I think I'm at the point where it's just, if it means I'm naive to trust them, that's okay. Fine. Then I'm naive. I'd rather do that for the sake of our relationship and for the sake of my sanity.
100%. I was going to say almost the exact same thing that Jen just said, and that if you allow homework corrections, it really allows your students to become vulnerable in a way that they wouldn't have before. Instead of feeling that grade pressure, instead of turning in something that's 0% theirs, 100% correct.
I also allow late work.
Exactly.
I allow late work. So I will say, hey, if it's 2 a.m., you don't know what you're doing, and you feel a guilty pang about having your roommate answer all the questions for you, why not just not turn it in and come ask me the questions yourself? That's the better path. So, yeah.
100%. 100%. And you'd be surprised. I think those of you, if you haven't tried it, give it a whirl, and you will learn so much about your students. They will ask you so many more things, and you'll be able to teach them instead of just giving them an A and realizing they didn't actually know anything.
Yeah.
Or you look at their final project and you think, what? What? How did you come up with that? You made 100% on all of your homework. Well, it wasn't really theirs. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And it requires a lot of work for me to do homework corrections. I mean, it is a lot of people. Yeah, lot of people in office. So be prepared. But
grading corrections and allowing late work adds to your plate. Like, full disclosure. It doesn't make your life any easier or better. It does make your teaching better. I will stand behind that. It does make your teaching better. It does make your relationship with your students better. You feel less like the police and more like the teacher.
Exactly.
That was good. That was a good ending. I mean, I don't know if we want to add anything else. Less like the police, more like a teacher. You're full of them today, Jen. Man.
You're not reading. You're not a police officer. We're also not construction workers.
We're not construction workers.
There you go.
No,
Just music theorists.
Just music theorists. That's right. Well, and I think that's also at the heart of that last chapter is like, we're just teachers. Like, we're not these, these people up on this like high precipice looking down on the ignorant masses. Like, no,
and
we're just people.
We don't have to prove anything to our students. We don't have to prove to our students that they belong there. I've actually never had a student not just assume that was the case.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I didn't even belong there. The 23-year-old teaching oral skills 1 at the University of North Texas. It's quite possible I did not. But when they walked in that door, they didn't assume that. They assumed that if somebody put me there, then I was there to teach them. Right. And if you take away that, like, they assume that you're qualified, they assume that you're smart, they assume that you're musical. If you take that out of the picture and just think, like, what do they need to learn? How can I help them get there? Like,
right. And starting with that and not the material itself. That's another really important point that he brings up, I think, in that chapter, is like starting with the students, not with the content. Yeah. And also, they do come in with those expectations that you know what you're talking about. So that's also, though, a way to make sure that you really do know what you're talking about.
That's true. That's true.
Because then they're like, wait, what? Like around week 3 or 4, they're starting to be like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this person.
Yeah.
And then you start getting uncomfortable emails from students about other faculty. Yeah, that can happen.
It can.
That can happen. But yeah, well, I think that's a good place for us to put a pin in it. And so we've got, I think, a couple more chapters. So I think one more episode before we wrap this up. But I hope these conversations have helped you. Hopefully you've been able to read along and get some ideas to implement in your own classroom this coming fall. So we will talk to you all next time.